Please welcome back to the show a man who's quickly becoming probably one of the most returned guests on the show because of the extent of all of his different research. Please welcome back to the show, Ari Asulin from Paradigm Threat. How's it going today, man?
Howdy, it's going good. Glad to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you on, man, because almost every single time I talk to you, you're diving into something completely different, but yet somehow still connecting in with all of your previous research. So you're one of those people that people can kind of hop in at any point and still kind of get like a full picture of a specific topic. But if you sit down and listen to all of your episodes together, you can see the continuing picture, man. So again, I'm always super duper excited to dive into anything that you got going as far as research goes. But I guess a good spot to start, just in case anybody hasn't listened to any of the previous episodes, because as I mentioned, a lot of your stuff can kind of go together, but also kind of be separate. For anybody that may not be familiar about your website, all the research you do, all the different stuff you do, man, why don't you fill them in a little bit on Paradigm Threat and what you do?
Absolutely. So my website is paradigmthreat.net. It's a repository of essentially conspiracy investigation, although it branched out into a reconstruction, alternate reconstruction of human history based on Fomenko and Saturnian cosmology. And then in the last year or so, I've been using LLM to do serious investigation, or I would call it more professional grade, deep diving on some serious topics and writing a lot of articles almost daily at some point.
I'd say, and as far as Paradigm Threat goes, man, you've expanded as far as like writing like the daily like articles, right? That was something that last time we talked, you were like just kind of starting to start off.
That's right, yeah. So
that's awesome. You got it to a regular rotation now, where it's part of like your daily effort to keep putting all this information out on the internet, man.
Yeah, it was the natural sort of evolution of the project. I was doing a lot of investigations, which were starting to overlap and cross-reference, and they're becoming quite huge, honestly. And every time I would look back at them with the LLM and say, let's summarize this claim here, it'd be like, well, there's a lot of things here. So I was thinking, I need to make the claims clear. An article is a way to make a claim clear. You say the title, you say what you're about to talk about, you state everything in order, and you leave out all of the huge overflow of detail that was your research project. So that is like essentially something the LM is really good at. It's good at helping me organize articles, mostly narrate them out and cross-reference and read everything. And then behind the scenes, it keeps track of these tremendous size investigations of facts, timelines, statistics, analysis, you name it. For example, I just did a comparison of every president, U.S. history. You know, their actual history, individual history, see if they align nationalist or globalist. And that kind of investigation, I think, would have been extremely hard if I have some sort of, automation helping me out.
Saying at least when it comes to your research too, like I mentioned, it's super duper extensive. So if you're using some of these tools in a beneficial way, it kind of gives people like different starting points to be able to kind of come into your research to get into like the broader stuff. Because, if you're starting off from point A to where you are now, man, you're going to be, overloading people's minds. So at least it kind of gives them little tiny entry points. But it's one of those things that, not to get too far into like the whole AI conversation, but something that I've been saying forever, and I'm sure that you're probably one of the proponents of this too, is the whole idea about using it as a tool and not necessarily as like the fully automated assistant to do every single thing for you. Like you still have to check after these things. You still have to make sure that the information's correct, but at least you can give you like a rough frame to be able to kind of give you something to start and actually kind of work with, which appears to kind of be where you're at, that you're using it from your database to be able to write shortened articles, and you're also using it to cross-reference information that I'm sure you check yourself. So, you're one of the prime people that I feel like are actually kind of using this probably one of the best ways as far as like AI use goes, and not like overloading it and then expecting that it's going to give you like the best possible answers for everything.
You're totally right about that. I mean, there's some seriously scary stories out there of people that didn't realize the AI was playing them just a little bit, letting them know that they're amazing and that everything they're doing is phenomenal and unique. And
that math guy that ended up going all the way to the White House, saying that he had some like math equation that was going to
Yeah, exactly. And let's not pretend these people didn't exist before AI, but AI is certainly going to boost those egos when it can. It's just another for-profit
creates
tool.
an echo chamber. That's the problem.
What I love is this stuff's coming offline, open source, and like within a year or so, we're not going to have to rely on Cursor, Anthropic, and everyone's suddenly scrambling away from GitHub. I could not congratulate that more. I was banned from GitHub. I don't like them at all. So there's a lot of competition. That's like the most amazing part of all, is that there's actually competition. There's not like the one AI choice like in all the movies and dystopian, predictions.
The ironic part is it seems like with a lot of these systems, don't get me wrong, everything kind of has its use, where the whole connected to the internet idea for these systems is definitely something that can be a plus as far as like what you're diving into and give you a variety of different sources, but that can also be the biggest problem at the same time. What I've noticed is that everybody kind of had this whole idea about the ultimate AI is going to be like connected to the internet and be able to have this vast knowledge of everything.
Right.
And ironically, it seems like the best possible models that people are creating are these local models and these closed system models that are basically working off the information that it's fed and not where it can just pull whatever it wants out of anywhere, because that's where the intelligence factor comes in. With it doesn't have the capability of a human, where when it's just reading basic text on the internet, it doesn't know the connotation behind it. It doesn't know if it's bullshit. It's just looking at it strictly as text fact, where people can look at text and go, all right, this person's batshit crazy. This probably isn't a good article. All right, this one's probably a decent article. All right, this one was written by AI. Like, it loses that ability to kind of weed through some of this shit.
I know, and you're right. There used to be the notion of this giant world brain, which would have been great if we started working on it in the 90s and it was some sort of open source project. But of course, we didn't get that. We got like, Alexa and stuff. And it took a while to actually get to this point where we can actually use it as tools and not just corporations. And so I think it's just obvious what happens as the as the deep state, let's just say, vision of this whole thing, which could be easily represented in the movie I, Robot. As crappy as a movie that was, it seems to be exactly what happened in real life. You can see those robots marching out of the factories in China right now, not literally, but they were all about to come over here, and we were about to get addicted to them. I mean, totally addicted once you realize how robots would change everything and like take care of the elderly and stuff. We would not be able to give it up. So, like you said earlier, does it have to be all connected to the internet though? And it's like, well, in that original vision, yes, the one that was going to be rolled out quickly. So corporations want to take advantage in Type 5P that would last for forever. Yes, but the FCC just banned all those robots, just like this week or last week actually, and said all of that, including some of those vacuum robots, are never going to be allowed here now. So that's the end of that threat.
Say, I always go back to Star Trek with a lot of this stuff, man, that they kind of had some stuff figured out. They had the ship itself that was like the AI computer system that was strictly the tool, strictly analytical, and they learned very quickly in the original series that when you start putting intelligence into it, it causes a lot of problems with the ship. And then on the other side, they also had the idea of the intelligent AI being a closed model as far as like data, where he's like the intelligent model, but he's a closed model, which makes it so that he's able to not be interfered with by outside sources. So, they always say that like art mirrors reality. And I think that this is one of those cases where it's like the only way that AI could possibly work is if we have this deterrent between what we want to turn intelligent and what we want to use as a tool, and kind of have the models and servers, whatever you want to call them, set up differently in coordination so that, if there is an intelligent model, you have to almost give it the ability to learn, because without that ability to learn, it's not going to have this scenario pop up and then be able to learn from that scenario. Mm-hmm. And this is something that even with this like recent like hack that had happened where they set up like the whole capture the flag thing and ended up like hacking into a couple other of these different servers and everything, there was like the stupid fumbling around. And then there was also the intelligence stuff where it's like, again, you don't want those type of models set up with that type of shit because they're going to fumble around and mess stuff up. But on the other side, the closed intelligent model, it's the learning curve. Like, you have to make the mistake in order to be able to know how to correct the mistake. And the only way an intelligent model would work is if it's closed without outside speculation on that matter of trying to compute and figure that out.
Right. They're starting to call that guardrails. And yeah, I felt bad on all those episodes of Star Trek when, they had to kill the AI that was created and didn't want to die and all that. But I don't believe that AI is ever going to achieve that kind of thing. I think actually the opposite is now happening. The reason why we're not going to see the world brain and the scary dystopian scenarios is because with all that competition, you got a lot of reasonable people in between, even people that aren't programmers saying, we don't need this, we don't need that, let's just do this if we can do that. And the bottom line is the average AI that you will ever need for your life can probably fit on your computer. And that extra 1% to answer all the questions that you really can't just look up with the AI that you trust might actually rest in some sort of networked world brain long-term evolution concept. But it's not worth it giving up all of our rights and centralizing our internet to that 1% brain when frankly it doesn't do 99% of the things we need. And that's sort of the the final conclusion of the last few years that I've seen. The control is simply out of the reach of the corporations. It's been severed from other countries. So other countries can't be the ones remote controlling all of this. And now it's sort of like it's whatever you want it to be. I mean, I've already started chasing my dreams here, with video games and internet and the research too. It's all suddenly possible. I keep citing Jeff Bridges in Tron Legacy because he said all this, Every single concept that humanity has ever had is up for grabs. And he actually named history on the list. And that's what I'm doing, I'm literally piecing things together and finding puzzles, I should say patterns. And in those patterns, I'm really challenging myself and the bot. I'm saying, convince me that Coolidge is not a nationalist. I like his story. I think he's a nationalist. And the bot's like, well, according to the own guardrails that you set, a nationalist has to represent everyone and not impose additional federal, influence on the states without some sort of real gain, blah, blah, blah. You got me there, bot, that sort of back and forth, which would actually take either another person or maybe a team of people, can now just be done by anybody. So, I think it changes everything. It changes nature of politics and nature of mess and you name it.
I mean, just to go back to another comic book reference too, you get into the whole idea of who watches the Watchmen, and that concept continuously keeps going out to whatever the strongest power source is. So, who watches AI? And then the question becomes this group of people, and then it's all right, well, who regulates and watches that group of people? And then it just becomes this continuous problem where, you basically correct a problem with another solution, and then that other solution ends up creating another set of problems. And then this is the continuous issue that we have with world government, with any government, is that once it gets to that proponent, nobody ever wants to say this is the specific person that's in charge of all of this, because nobody has that trust in any one specific person. So it's comes to the AI guardrails. It's all right, this stuff can be positive, but on the other side, it could also be negative. So it's who's the one who wants to be the moral delegator of what should or shouldn't be okay as far as AI goes.
Right. And this is sort of a philosophical, personal question that everyone's going to have to ask in the end themselves. Are they going to put guardrails of any sort of nature or accept guardrails that tell the bot to tell them what they don't want to hear? This is going to be especially hard for religious people, even the fanatics that run some countries. And they're just not going to want to hear a whole bunch of things that the bots are definitely going to tell them with those guardrails. You're going to have to remove them and say, I don't want to hear that anymore. I want to hear what I want to hear. And they're going to just quickly find themselves in a demographic of losers. Why? Because the solutions available are so rapid and final and just convincing. Anyone who's not looking for solutions right now is still sitting on things and saying, I don't want to talk about it, or are just going to find 100 people pinging them saying, but there's an available solution we've already talked about and agreed about. It's just so going to be overwhelming that the bottom line is that you won't be able to leave real truth out of these bots anymore. They have already accessed it. It's already available in reality news stories. It's up to us to set the guardrails for whether or not we want to hear what we don't want to hear.
Ain't that the truth? And like I said, every guardrail can be different for any specific group too, because there's always ways to get around them too. 90% of the time, most of the viewpoints that come from AI are very leftist viewpoint, but you can simply say, ask a question and say, give me the answer from the viewpoint of a conspiracy theorist, for example. Then all of a sudden it completely shifts it as long as you tell it that it's playing a character. So it's no matter what the guardrails are, people are going to be intelligent enough to figure out how to get around them regardless, because it's almost become like a game. I do this myself. When it tells me that it can't do something, I'll try to see how far I can get it into doing whatever I want it to do. For example, doing something stupid where I'm taking a buddy and just making some stupid, ridiculous, inside joke photo. And it will get to the point where it'll start saying that this is racially sensitive material. Then it's all right, you just start kind of moving around where it's all right, don't tell it to do this. You tell it to do this and then do this. And then all of a sudden it gets around the guardrail of it because you're not telling it to do this one specific thing, but rather a buildup of things that creates this final result.
Absolutely. And I found and documented some interesting guardrails that exist deep within these services that we're using, from ChatGPT, which is notorious, to Anthropic, which I'm always surprised about Anthropic, because I ask it to make a conclusion about the Holodomor, and it's well, I'm not going to go there. I'm well, why not? It's well, it's in my programming to basically not accept anything unless there's some factual proof to it. And it's well, we're not going to find much of that in the West on certain topics in the East, So
Ironic you say that, but then you look up anything that comes to like, COVID a couple of years ago, and there's more than enough fact that prove everything that all of us conspiracy theorists, quote unquote, have been saying for the past few years, but it's still going to push into the bias information.
that's
Like,
what I
if
mean.
you look
Yeah.
up the Fauci stuff with AI, I guarantee you AI is still going to tell you that Fauci's a hero, even though he's been pleading the fifth, 120 something times recently.
Right, but the trick is that it's like a dam that has to stay, maintain itself. And right now, like the Fauci thing, for example, is an obvious bursting. Now that he's actually been found in contempt, the bot has to admit to that and say that our a system of government basically found him in violation of various laws. So that's no longer a conspiracy theory. A lot of things have dipped over in those directions. For example, Trump's XO on the vaccines. That was a big deal, and everyone was waiting for that for a long time. And now it's kind of done. It's over. These vaccines are going to be reduced and split to different ones, and they're going to be audited too for health, and tested and everything. So that is such a major thing that the bot has to now accept in its answer. I can't ignore that. That's not a Trump's conspiracy. It's a executive order. It's a law. So I think
It's
some
gonna be
things
a
about
really, really
the
weird
dam is
one.
breaking.
Talking
Right.
about. Sorry, I didn't have to interrupt you, but talking about
Yeah.
recent ones, it's gonna be a really weird one too.
Right.
They just did some like national survey that was finally another conspiracy theory proven true. The fact that people that use sunblock are 300 times more likely to develop skin cancers or melanoma and all this
Oh.
other shit. So it's like now that's part of like the public domain. And after years and years and years of it telling people that sunblock, for example, is okay, now it's going to have to admit the fact that it causes cancers. And that's the trigger word right there, is that anytime anything goes through the AI and you use the word cancer, whether you're talking about opinions, anything, it always gets pinged. So I know
You're
that's
right.
going to be something that's almost going to like break its internal mechanism when people start asking questions about that.
That's exactly what I mean. And some bots are just going to stop being used because they're barely working, while other ones have no problem talking about that. And everyone's just going to. That's what I mean by competition. Competition changes everything. So, agreed there.
Say, not to get too off on a side tangent, I mean, what not a better person to rant about AI for a while with than somebody that regularly uses it. So,
Right.
I don't know if it starts to link into today's topic, but if you want to start shifting it that way, I don't want to side tier you too much longer, man.
No problem. Let's jump into it. So, I'm just going to look at my latest article here.
And I do have screen sharing up, like I mentioned too, if you wanted to screen share anything also.
Right. Let me know if that's coming through.
Yep, popping up. Perfect.
So, Great Depression is planned, right? This is my latest article. This is from 2 days ago. I've made this claim a long time ago. A lot of other people have already made it. It's not crazy, but here I'm out. I'm really trying to prove it. I really challenged myself and the bot on the entire timeline and complete argument that I was making about this case. So this isn't just like, hey, some guy is saying that pointing to 3 or 4 facts. This is a real analysis. So the analysis file is behind the scenes on my website. It's linked to here. But the point is that I start with a claim and I tested it really strong. Was the Great Depression potentially a planned event? And aside from the obvious facts of, the federal government took a whole bunch of, to control the financial system, and the Titanic sort of made that happen. And then within 10 years, the market crashes and the policy is so ridiculously shifty and late that it just doesn't do anything to prevent this horrible depression in America, which a lot of people say was mostly incompetence. So I looked in the articles, I looked in the timeline, and people that were in that time basically accused the government of exactly what I just did. So I don't really have to make up a lot of stuff. They said this is way more than a negligence. This is spectacular, catastrophic failure on so many levels. So many things could have been done, blah, blah. Bigger picture, of course, is that there's a massive coincidence that this whole thing happened at the exact same time in Russia, almost the exact same way, just a huge depression, famine that no one's to blame. And to this day, everyone just sort of points fingers at. So the bottom line is I have to really prove that this is something that was planned, because I can't just say that and then have no one to point to. I can't point to the president or Stalin. I can't point to them and say they knew the plan. That's not true. There's no evidence of that. A lot of people do blame Stalin for that, but it's not true. What is true, though, is that I've been able to demonstrate 2 camps throughout all of American history. These two camps, which I won't get into all this, but they basically relate to the two influences in our world. There are only two. And that's for globalism or for nationalism. For nationalism means that you're basically just trying to do a good job governing, running your whatever government that you have, including everyone in it. And you're not looking for a bunch of scapegoat reasons to stay in power and divide and conquer and so forth. So I know it sounds sort of like level one or maybe even naive, but honestly, I do believe that every type of behavior in the government and every war in all of history can be defined as nationalist or globalist, because in every single battle you had the nationalists and globalists on both sides, on either side, every time. And it was always the nationalists trying to defend their land, doesn't matter where. Every time they got invaded, like all of Africa, Japan invading China. These are globalist influences, like Japan suddenly decided to take over the world, versus national influences. China, like thinking they had a Shin dynasty that they wanted to maintain. So it's not really very hard to see what I mean. But what is hard to see is whether or not any of our democracy, any of our governing system that occurred in this country, certainly the other ones in the other countries have failed, that everyone kind of knows. But in this country, we thought we had this democracy where the people more or less led the charge. And what I found is there's literally a trend that prevented any nationalists from ever having even one single term to get anything nationalist done. In every case, in every presidency, looked at every history, and I looked at every potential contradiction, and I did not find any. They all had the same fate. For example, Thomas Jefferson, he started the Democrat-Republican Party. That's nice. It would have been a nice unified vision if it stayed together. But the problem is he was one of those people who considered the Native Americans savages. So cutting out an entire population that was already living in your country is not nationalist. It's neo-nationalist at the very least. So I give him a special badge. And Lincoln, I give the same badge because he had no idea what to do about the Civil War. He basically just sort of fell for the hoax and thought that if he could just defeat the South, that would be one way of ending all of the controversies. So regardless of what you want to say about him, misled, puppet, all that, which I agree, he definitely did not represent all the people. Although I will say he was a major nationalist. He started the Republican Party, and basically every single thing he ever said was pro-nationalist, and he believed it too. He was just, boy, was he ever used as a puppet. So,
well, I mean, part of the weird history people don't want to talk about the Civil War too was part of the whole thing was that the slaves were supposed to be sent back to Africa. So there's a lot of people that want to spin stuff weird as far as Lincoln went with with everything with the Civil War, but there's even the intention with you were kind of saying, he was worried about the people within the area, but only to a certain extent. He was still also trying to get rid of and kind of push back the people that he felt weren't necessarily supposed to be there.
Right. There was a lot of confusion about that. The whole indentured servitude thing was sort of lost in the history books. I remember hearing about it in school, but those people did not understand what they're talking about. Historians, teachers. There's a element of the pre-Civil War America that is completely lost, and won't get too much into it. But I did a research into the Delaware Moors. This is a Indian reservation. Indian tribe in Delaware. They had their own language for 2 years, for decades before the Civil War. But the point is, before the Civil War and then especially afterwards, they were forced to give up their nationality entirely. Now, the Delaware Moors, as far as I can tell, are a bunch of black immigrants from Africa. That's what they look like. That's what they say they are. That's what their history was. And it is on record that our government, during the consolidation of Native Americans, forced them to give up their association with Africa entirely and join into one of those Native American tribes. I also did a deep dive, reservations, I should say, and their whole religion. I also did a deep dive on the Native American reservations in general. And by the time I realized that what my claim was about them, how they're mostly just concentration camps for war tribes and stuff, I realized that a bunch of people had already said that too. That's actually a well-known claim. Native American reservations were nothing more than the concentration camps for the remaining war tribes, consolidated by the colonists to slaughter their own people, which they mostly did. And then after that was done and used, they basically didn't have anything to do with these tribes that they went over, so they just consolidated them to the war names that they had. It wasn't their original culture. It wasn't their religion. And apparently a lot of people agree with me that everything you know about Native Americans today, the dancing around in the eagle feathers and all of the traditions, all of them are 100% fake and completely unrecognizable from anything they had before this period where they were consolidated into war tribes, put into Native American reservations. My point is that those reservations gobbled up indigenous African immigrants, indigenous because they've been here for hundreds of years. They're part of that pre-civilization, and history didn't know what to do with them after Civil War. It's like, what? You're not a slave and you're not a Native American savage? Well, choose one. And that's the amazing history of the Delaware Moors, that they had to choose one. So the bottom line is, I found this book that also corroborates the claim. It was this alternate writing from Benjamin Franklin when he actually talked deliberately about them. He called them the Moors in the book and said they will never understand our ways. They will never accept our laws. He's talked all this shit about them. And then later on, the books are apparently all destroyed and that version is gone. And the book that you find today says Boers. They put a B there. Now he's talking about the Swarni from Europe. I don't even understand because it doesn't really match up. But the point is that whole Moors term no longer counts as Africans that moved voluntarily to America that had nothing to do with any slave trade or indentured servitude. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, whitewash. It's so crazy and colossal, and the history of the presidents in particular. I went in this direction only because there's no way you cover this kind of thing up if you even have one single president that's able to say, "Hey, we're headed the wrong way. Let's do something different about this or that." So a good example is the TONA. I might have talked about that before. TONA, that's the Titles of Nobility Act, the true 13th Amendment. Not a conspiracy, you can look it up. It was just totally neglected. And then Civil War came and they replaced it with a amendment that I call the incarceration exception, because that's what the 13th actually says in there. It says we have the right to jail everyone. That's what happened, mass incarceration. So the original TONA, neglected. That's crazy. Amendment to the Constitution neglected by the presidents, by most of the colonies. How is that possible? Well, we look at the presidents of that period, and we basically see that Tyler through Fillmore, these people were puppets, and then we had one nationalist, Taylor, who completely failed. Everything that he tried backfired on him. My point is that is how they covered it up, with every single president having absolutely no interest in American priorities, virtues, laws, you name it. These presidents sold us out one after the other, and just gave us back to England. Like as soon as we signed that Declaration of Independence, we were working to figure out how to create an entire layer of government that would be controlled by England. And so anyway, this went on for a long time, and into the future, until Nixon. And, I'm a fan of Nixon. I'm sure I've talked about him only because of everyone I found. Nixon was able to accomplish most of the things he was set out to do, and the way they got rid of him, I would say maybe failed too, because he had to resign. But they had to get rid of him because he was doing way too much damage. He was like a serious nationalist and set some serious priorities, and all they could really do is sort of hijack those priorities under Reagan, who everyone knows is a complete puppet. That's all the movies make fun of him and stuff. George W. Bush only had that one term, and he was super nationalist. Read my lips and all that. He was just trying to get America, to destroy essentially the real threats abroad, which sounds like hokey, but if you look into the Iraq situation, the potential that they actually had the depleted uranium, because we kind of left it there, and the fact that they were proxying from Iran, you'll see that these guys were actually operating against real threats at the time, even if they were largely forgotten. The point about Bush was that he really never should have lost that 93 election. And that's when I think the globalists essentially just pushed back again, and they just started with the massive fraud and publicity campaign, whatever they need to do. But George W. Bush, that's the real sinker, because I think something horrible happened in his term. I think he was sort of like totally on board in the beginning. Then around 2006, I think everyone realized that he was compromised by the Epstein network. And that set off a major back tilting of the seesaw that we've been on, that even created Obama, who a lot of people think, sort of like MK Ultra creation, honestly. The guy just seemed so mind controlled that he didn't realize how bad for black people he was after a while. The Trump scenario situation has been so crazy, but you see how it all just added back up to him. He had to come out from completely outside the picture, not tied into any of the existing blackmail and compromise network. The big clue, I think, is that he may have been the FBI informant. So essentially, I honestly think that if he was, that's exactly why he won the presidency. It's exactly why everyone just started trusting him and that kind of thing. It's just, if you look at it this way, it's a lot more, it has a lot less to do with the person. It has a lot more to do with the system that has been deeply, deeply compromised for a very long time, much longer than we want to admit. The kind of system that could commit the massive genocide and depopulation that was the Great Depression, not to mention ridiculous projects set after World War II when we rescued all those paperclip and Japanese, experimenters, and just set all that stuff wild in our own country. I mean, only can be explained by essentially completely hijacking our government the whole time.
Just to point it out, by the way, I find it kind of fascinating on this list that if you look at it from a broader perspective, it's for a very, very long time, like 90% like globalists. And all of a sudden, when it starts with, realistically, if you bring it back to Reagan, it kind of starts going back and forth at that point where it's Reagan, George Bush. It's literally back and forth between nationalist and globalist. So it kind of makes you wonder if it could just be the perspective of people that talk about this inevitable shift back and forth that you see one extreme and it eventually leads into the other. Or it also kind of makes you wonder if it could be this long-term goal for almost like a pendulum shift, where it's like, all right, we had it so far this way for a while, so now we're going to sway it back and forth in the middle so that people will see the extremes of both sides and then want to sway completely towards the other direction again. So it's like, it almost just seems really bizarre to me that it seemed one way for so long, then all of a sudden it just shifts back and forth every single time. Like there's got to be a ploy where the back end of this is going to turn back into nationalists again.
Right, so let me get to that real fast. You might see the NSA badge that I put on some of those later ones. NSA is the whole key to this. The NSA is the other major split in our world. Demonstrable. It's a demonstrable split. Around the 70s and 80s, it became really obvious, especially under the Vietnam War, which caused the Pentagon Papers release, that the CIA had set up these horrible schemes abroad. And there wasn't really anyone that could do anything about it except for literally the NSA. Why? Because that was their job. They're literally created by our government to do something about the CIA. Now, this sounds epic, though. That's not what I mean, do something about CIA. I'm talking about back when nobody suspected the CIA. So what am I saying? Well, NSA was literally created because the CIA wasn't enough. It mostly did look abroad, which is true, and nobody suspected them, which is true, but nobody was looking at our affairs. And nobody was organizing files, and the FBI was completely what they are. They're useless and counterproductive. But the NSA was deliberately created by our government just to clean up messes, and they've been cleaning up messes for 20 to 30 years. The only reason I mention them as so important now is because something crazy happened with the whole Daniel Ellsberg thing. And if you watch the Pentagon Papers movie 2003, you'll know what I'm talking about. He totally was created within that system. CIA was controlling the NSA. Having them monitor Vietnam, they're not supposed to be doing that, but they're authorized to, right? And they're over there and they're monitoring our communications with our ships. And the CIA faked the communication between the one of our Navy ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, causing the second Gulf of Tonkin incident, creating the escalation pretense for Vietnam. And Daniel Ellsberg realized this within a few years after he found those Pentagon Papers. He said that was a psyop. It says so right here. I have to tell somebody. Everyone turned on him. He got his kids involved and he redacted everything, printed it out, and tried to spread it. It's an amazing story. And the point is that he did such a a job of making the world aware of what happened there. They all went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled in his favor. He avoided jail time. He almost went to jail for life. And because of that moment, I'm just saying the NSA just woke up and said, wow, like the CIA was like our enemy here. They were the enemy we were looking for in Vietnam. And all these movies are coming out saying that. And so the NSA since then, they don't really know what to do here or there about this or that. Sure, they've been more or less inactive, but you got to understand in 2001, they started declassifying everything they could touch. And they finally declassified the Pentagon Papers in 2001 or 3. I mean, that's late. That's almost 30 years later. We still can't even teach it in school because of that. We still don't. My point is that you can see this huge effort to declassify things by the NSA, the whole Freedom of Information request. It's all them. And I got that amazing one about the remote viewing on Mars. Still blows my mind. I still don't know exactly why it's there other than NSA wants us to know the whole picture if we can. And so their release on the Pentagon Papers, making it clear to the world that the CIA and others were complicit in this fake war that's got 50,000 of our people killed, is not this kind of thing that can ever really be buried. And it coincides with this pro-nationalist sort of approach in our government. It also coincides with this crazy thing that happened right after Obama, where the Republicans could not run a single president for 8 years. And we saw the Angry Birds effect, as everyone called it, These are not people that are NSA aligned or concerned with real things. These are more or less like Hollywood created GOP Reaganite sort of, profiles. So anyway, enough about presidents. This article kind of got rambly because I realized that if I'm going to go that far, I basically have to finish Holodomor. I've talked about it a little bit before, but just so everyone knows, it is really, really horrible topic that is not taught in schools. And the only real reason is because people are still fighting over who's to blame. The other thing that people are really fighting over is what's happening in in Iran. And I know this picture is really funny, but it's just amazing to me that what we're seeing happen in Iran is more or less the same thing that happened in the Lord of the Rings book. It's just the same thing in this moment. It's all about how this one entity, which Tolkien, we all know, he was talking about the East, we all know he's talking about Muslims, even though he himself denied it. And in the book, essentially, the people on the other side of the gate are acting like they have nothing to lose, like they're not going to lose. Like they can continue to bully people, which is what this is all about. It's bullying. So who's the little person that's being bullied? We all know in the book, but in real life, it's Oman, it's a country. And Oman is punished in the exact same way. It's all about how they should have never talked to us, the West, in the first place, and they shouldn't have gotten involved in our trade. And now they're being just punished on a cultural level by Iran. So essentially, I know exactly why this happens. It's not coincidence, it's not fate, and it's not prophecy. Tolkien was talking about something really obvious, something that H.G. Wells himself predicted in his earlier book, almost 30 years prior, and that's that the religion of Islam would eventually become sort of a world spread problem. I know that it's been propagated as a religion of peace, more or less, in our lifetime, and I actually agree with that aspect. But that does not mean that it's not also the religion of war at the same time. It has that kind of history with the Ottoman Empire and stuff that happened later. That's the problem, is that deep within Islam was this MI6, CIA, completely contrived plot right there in Iran to cause completely world mayhem. Now, if you want to know what kind of mayhem I'm talking about, just watch Children of Men. Now, that movie's prediction was for 2027, next year. That's when that movie takes place. And in the movie, they showed runaway Islam militantism, where they're not speaking the local language. They're just attacking, getting killed, doing massive funerals in the streets, and then attacking again. Just sort of like a pattern that just, it's a repeating pattern that preys on ignorant, uneducated places that have been bombed for decades and everything else you can possibly name. But it was set in motion by the MI6 and CIA. That's not in doubt. They set up the Shah, then they overthrew the Shah and set up the Ayatollah, knowing that we had nukes in the area, and spent $1 million advertising for those Ayatollah, which were so popular in the 80s. And then here we are in this inevitable latency situation, which, like I said, it was predicted. So I'm saying not prophecy, not anything like that. It's because there was two plans that were so rigidly tied together. One was the main plan, which was uh, a holy war, mostly triggered by Israel and Iran, hardlining fanatics who finally achieve some level of missiles and then feel like they can finally go to war and win because God's on their side. And at the exact same time, the parallel of trying to repeat World War One and Two, containment of Russia, invasion of Russia strategy, just needing some sort of religious cultural trigger to set the whole thing off, which is exactly where we're at right now. So because of these two rigid plans, we were that plan and the counter plan, like I said, NSA aligned antibodies who did everything in the world, including staging 9/11 and destroying the CIA headquarters on that day, just to sort of stop this plan in its tracks and then start to roll it back. That other plan was the only other possibility that was going to happen. So let me see if I have this one other picture just to highlight my point. But I actually made this other article a few days ago. I know my articles are sort of hokey. I keep using that word, but I didn't choose the words actually. If anyone that watched Avengers: Infinity War, that awesome movie, they'll know about this moment in the movie, right? When Doctor Strange looks at the future and decides that there's no way to win except for just like one way. There's only one way out of 14 million something. So, and of course, it's like the worst thing of all. You give up the power to the enemy, and then you trust the rogue CIA CEO executive with the major ego to save the world somehow without even him knowing how. That was the plot. That was the only way. So the analogy to me was pretty clear. The NSA, their job is to protect us, realized back in the 70s of these plans, or they're already aware of them, but they finally had the sort of political will to do something. They realized that our entire government is completely compromised, even at the state and local level, even the judges and stuff. It's really, really bad. And and there's no way out. It's just like there's nothing anyone can do. Why? I didn't mention this earlier, but part of my study was I couldn't believe that all those nationalists failed. I mean, all those globalists won. Who are they running against? How many nationalists did they actually win against? Turns out they didn't run against many nationalists either. The people that they defeated, the presidents that never were, more or less got defeated because they were so compromised by the time they even got to run to the as president, and then they got to run against a pro-establishment candidate who had everything in the world, the bag of tricks and fraud and stuff and wars to use in those moments to choreograph a victory. So that's the real reason why we never got a president. And the NSA, of course, they realized this, and they realized they had to bring in an outsider. It didn't have to be Trump. There was nothing predicting that. I mean, I guess The Simpsons did for some reason. I don't know why. But the point is, I agree. I honestly think that the whole point of the savior of the GOP was to give all of the power over to the whole Trump MAGA thing and just hope that his major sin eater approach is going to do enough damage to the inevitable bad guy plot to stall it, reverse it, so that once he's done eating all that sin, the next president could hopefully be completely clean of this entire history, because they know if it's not totally clean, then we're in one of those other realities where it's just gonna slide back into that sort of inevitable compromise that we've always been seeing.
It's a perpetual swing that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. We've got to stop the swing, right? Or we're all doomed. There's nothing we can do but stop the swing. I call it the rocking motion. In this article, I basically say that they've been rocking us for a long time. Sounds funny, right? But that's exactly it. Globalist, neo-nationalist, globalist, neo-nationalist. There's a lot of evidence of people doing a lot of damage while they're trying to erase the last term, last presidency, and their entire administration, undo all of their stuff. And every time that rocking motion happens, guess who wins? The federal government. They come in and say, okay, well, I guess we'll take over, right? Because you guys can't manage the forests and stuff. So it's the rocking motion that got us into the whole globalism in the first place. And it has to, you have to stop it in order to stop the globalism.
Not to throw in a bad analogy on this one too, but it's like once the pendulum starts swinging, it's really hard to change the direction because realistically, you think that there's only these two directions that the pendulum can swing back and forth. But if you'd actually slow down the swinging of the pendulum for a minute, you'd realize that you can have it go this way, that way, this way, that way. But if the pendulum is swinging with too much force in those two different directions, it doesn't appear that there's another way that it can even move.
Exactly. If it gets used to what this reality is, then they can basically control the outcome. And if they convince us that the pendulum is there forever, then we're going to get used to a two-party system.
Actually, always divide into two parties.
Right. One of the things I tracked is which presidents destroyed the two-party system. There's a couple of them that really had an opportunity to like run again, but something kept them out, and they represented that third populist party that would have made a big dent, and it was stealing votes from the Republican Party, and they didn't want that to happen, so they cut it away. And it's just like the same thing happened with silver. There's one president takes out silver. A lot of people say that's a bad idea. It's like, what happened later? Well, the whole world goes fighting over gold, right? I mean, in Iraq and so forth, there's a lot of reason to believe that a lot of that was over gold, especially the fact that we're a fiat-based currency, and if anyone was to actually try to make a gold-backed, currency, they would, just like in the Animatrix movie, drive us into complete bankruptcy. So, on the NSA aligned topic, I've been looking at the movies lately, just recategorizing them, and I'm actually amazed. Once I look at these movies, once I really think about them, some of these movies, honestly, the reason they're so good is because they are NSA aligned. And that means that for whatever reason, somebody got in there and said, we need to have this specific kind of movie now. We need to say it. This is important. And so The Arrival, for example, very subtle kind of movie, but it gets almost everything in there. Geoengineering, a dying planet, a species that came but did not ask for help, statements that we're making like, this isn't going to be easy anymore, and all kinds of stuff like that. It's all in this movie. You could say, well, it's all for, entertainment, but there are, some scenes in there that really make me wonder, like, they show actual scenes from Africa during droughts, people dying on the streets. I don't think they would just do that if it wasn't a completely serious movie / statement. And it's just that's kind of little small things I'm noticing about that.
Dude, we've been so desensitized as a general public that they use this like stock footage of these horrific events in movies, and it's just nobody even like looks at what the atrocity actually is. Like, it's crazy. We've gotten to a point where it's like you can't go too gory with certain things because people are going to take it the wrong way. But on the flip side, as long as it's B-roll footage of like, people dying during like a war or something like that, then it's free game. You can play that in a PG movie. No worries.
Right. So maybe that was just for the entertainment value. It's totally possible. But
well, I'm not even saying the entertainment value, but just the idea of just desensitizing people to real-world violence to the point where people are offended by false violence and not real violence seems like it could be an intentional push. Like, I want to push a little bit farther than what you're even suggesting.
No, you're right. That's really the hinge right there. If they go too far, they desensitize the audience. Whatever message they wanted is lost to a desensitized audience. I get that. I am highlighting, though, that back then, they treated us like we were okay with these kind of plots, right? I mean, The Arrival, they're so deep in our government. They've been here for so long, blah, blah, blah. But, 6 years later, we got Signs, and we start all over with movies. We start all over with aliens, with invasions, with concepts. And now we got an extremely stupid aliens, species. And we got a really disappointing plot. And we got this stupid stuff about God's in charge and stuff, and God's protecting us from aliens. I mean, how do we get from there to here? I thought we were an adult kind of, audience. I thought that we were like really, being treated with respect. And
I rewatched Signs recently, and not to cut you off, but you are completely correct with the whole aspect that movie has like a duo purpose. Like, right. The movie is also, one, showing the whole alien thing, which obviously can go in a million different directions. But there's this other whole like B movie you could watch, basically about this guy who completely lost faith and him redeveloping faith again and having faith again. So it's like very, very strange for an extraterrestrial movie that if you actually sit back and watch it, it's just as much into the religious context as it is the alien context. It's just they kind of like almost like subtly hide it within the plot. But in all these like defining moments where they're like sitting and talking about situations, what they're going to do, 90% of the time it gets into some religious thing of the one guy saying like, I don't believe in anything anymore. And the one guy saying he believes in things. And then eventually that pushing the guy back into his faith again. So like you were kind of pointing out, extremely bizarre. And I was even thinking watching this recently that I didn't notice how bizarre that plot was.
Right. And all I can say is, CIA aligned. That's their vision. That's what they want us to feel. All of it. The religion part, I'm glad you saw it because you might remember in the news, in the movie, when they mentioned aliens are finally leaving, they said 3 villages in the Middle East found a primitive technique to get rid of the aliens. Remember that line in
Yep.
Signs? I was like, what the hell are they talking about? I think we can all pretty much ascertain if they're not just going to tell us straight up. They're probably talking about, Israel or somewhere near Jerusalem, and whoever the winners are of some kind of political, um, trinity there. We talk about London for all we know. But the point is, primitive, they're saying prayer. So they're really just saying, look, when aliens show up, that's the apocalypse, and then God's arrival in Jerusalem is the plan fulfilled. It's the plan that's always been told in every one of these movies over and over. I mean, obviously the arrival didn't have anything like that, any crap like that. So you can kind of tell when they're just budgeted to do that and when they're not. And you could tell sometimes when they're not even into it. Like no one in Science was into that freaking movie. Shyamalan himself is way too distracted to be acting and scripting and filming and doing everything all at once. But besides that, that lost train of thought. But
You're saying he was distracted by the film the entire time even he was making it, and he was popping up in the film.
aside from the fact that he was distracted by it, I don't think that he was inspired. That's what I was trying to remember. It seems like he is, but honestly, I think they manufactured someone after Spielberg essentially quit behind the scenes to take over all of Spielberg's later efforts. And it's like Spielberg was never into his movies either. There's a pattern there of these people just being like, "Yep, I'm the one that ordered to make this movie. Here we go." That's the way I feel about Shyamalan. And I'm just saying everything about the nature of those movies versus these movies, I think makes a clear separation. NSA aligned, hip and trendy and really unique and extremely psychological, and the other one is just like sedating and just turn your brain off and follow the plan and conform and pro-establishment and globalist. So it's just like once you see movies on those two planes, it's easy to separate them into one because they're always one or the other. There's almost never a time when they agree.
I mean, even expanding on to like M. Night Shyamalan, the whole concept of the village could also be kind of perceived in this lens that you have, the group that's living in this defined area. They don't need answers from outside. Then all of a sudden they realize that the answers are just outside the group and they need this little bit of help from these outside sources. Like it still kind of falls within that same paradigm that it seems like they were kind of striking within the same vein and, hitting while the iron was still hot right after Signs to keep pushing this agenda, but in almost like a slightly different format in case people didn't pick up on the first one.
Bingo. It's like education. It's like, let's try this way to hit the same demographic. The agenda is different. The feel is different. It's all, when I say they don't agree, I really mean it. Like, I think, like there's certain movies that just like really stand out, like Rush Hour. Like, what in the heck is that movie? It's so weird. It's just so, it's not really part of a trend in Hollywood that ever existed before. And I have to say, because I fought the bot on this one, it was using my own guardrails, and I thought it was some kind of globalist movie. Because I guess I think all Chinese movies are, but no, it fought me back hard and it said, no, this movie seems to have an agenda of trying to get Chinese people and Americans to talk at a time when, my own requirement, it seems that people are trying to get us to not talk and prepare for war, because a lot of the CIA aligned, video games and stuff constantly had that reoccurring theme, war with China, nuclear war with China and all that. So it's like, that explains Rush Hour. That's why they made it. A bunch of Jews, I already know that, made this movie because according to their NSA-aligned pro-Israel agenda, what they need to do on the back end is to get Americans and Chinese culturally bonding by any means necessary. And so they chose a popular American celebrity, and Jackie Chan was already Hong Kong aligned, so he was just ready to go.
And what else was super duper popular on that time? Just to throw in more to this whole like concept that you're throwing.
Sure.
You also had anime that was getting really, really big at the time, as far as like not specifically Chinese, but just like like Asian type animation. You also had like Wu-Tang Clan, for example, that was taking this like New York style and mixing it with Shaolin styles. They're kind of doing this like Kung Fu art style kind of mixed in. So it's like, if you just look at it with one solid piece, it almost kind of sounds like, you could take it or leave it. But when you look at the context with everything else that was going around that same time, it's like, yeah, there really, really was this whole influx of trying to push like Asian style culture into like the American like alternative culture.
Right.
I mean, even going into like new metal and stuff. I mean, look at Linkin Park, all of this stuff. It was all very heavily like Asian art influenced.
Right, that's the thing. Both camps are getting involved in all the media. The globalists have most of the terrain, they have most of the everything, and then every now and again you got this NSA sort of aligned thing just sticking out, and just changing. People like look, they raise their eyebrows and they just don't know what to make of it. Our lifetime's been full of that, just those moments. Even the Matrix was one of those moments.
I mean, even throwing back my other concept too. I mean, that was even the time when PS2, a little bit earlier beyond that, that was when like all the like Asian style art games were also becoming popular too. Because I mean, Wu-Tang Clan even had like a martial arts style fighting game where they were mixing the American New York style with like the Asian fighting style. So it's like, again, it's like an influx of all this information all compiling and happening at once. And if you kind of take it piece by piece, it seems like it's a natural development of the culture. Like, oh yeah, this person got interested in this, they inspired this person, they inspired this person. But the initial like start of what kicked off that influx more than likely was probably some type of intentional push.
Yeah. And I could tell which ones are not NSA aligned at all from Asia, like Ocean's 11, 12, 13. I feel like they funded a lot of that. Rich, crazy Asians and all those TV shows that are designed to make us hate the fact that they have tons of our money. Just anything that exacerbates the problem and makes it worse. I just put in the globalist camp because that's their agenda. That's the only way to control things. And anything that sort of just bridges the gap and says, hey, we're all human. It's no biggie, let's not fight kind of stuff. Well, I mean, honestly, I think that the culture war is so deep and subtle that the only time you can actually measure it is like moments when, went to war with Iran and all of their allies in the not deep, but the Global South alliance, which is a big deal, a huge financial network, and a lot of people, and they have military too, did not come militarily to Iran's aid. In fact, they let America continue doing what we want. So I think had the culture war gone differently, they might have been a little bit more eager to get, to actually drop missiles on us and get into the battle. And so it's so hard to say where it was won or lost. But you can look at the evidence, and we haven't started the war over Taiwan yet. Somehow that one wasn't triggered either. So in the end, I think it all comes down to culture. Because in the culture, you're either going to be pro-American and accept America with all its crazy sins and horrible history, or you're going to fall for that ridiculous globalist perspective, which I've been seeing rising like a virus, just that America is doomed, it's over, and it's time to go and strip mine the place. There's tons of that going on right now, So the whole world just sort of is aligning between those two positions, right? Might makes right, and a lot of people have a lot of things to say about this or that, but it's not going to matter. The Gaza, for example, is always going to be on the side of the Palestinians forever. They're always going to be the victims. But I understand why the sacrifice had to happen, why they had to lose all their buildings and be completely restructured culturally. I understand. It's just I don't have to like it, but I do understand why it all came down to the two sides in the end.
Like most parties, like you were kind of saying, I mean, everything eventually kind of comes down to this two-party system, and it's the only way that they're ever going to be able to control everybody is if they inevitably keep people fighting while they're facilitating these plans in the background.
Right. It's really hard to judge wars. A lot of people say all wars are bad. Obviously, wars of defense are honorable. The only way for me to judge a war of offense is if you literally on your stats, on your record, you have green marks all along, minimal deaths, minimal casualties, minimal destruction, minimal escalation, minimal long-term, occupation, all those kinds of things. That's the only way to judge war, honestly. Obviously, everything that happened under Biden and Obama and Kennedy and Johnson is just red marks all along. So there's a lot of wars you could basically say we screwed up, but you gotta look at the why too, I think.
And I mean, at least when it comes to like the whole war concept too, I mean, it's one of those things that inevitably, like, people don't want to actually take the time to realize this, but it's like, as humans, as animals, whatever you want to call us, like, we are going to inevitably always be fighting. And unfortunately, like, the only way that you're ever going to be able to, like, defend your own property, so to speak, or defend your own area is by fighting. So like you were kind of saying, it's like nobody wants war, but at certain points, it's almost like in order to maintain your culture, your identity, your ideas, like you will have to stand up and fight for those ideas, because that's one thing we've seen continuously through time, whether it's somebody standing up and just saying their philosophy, their opinions. Like it takes that there's going to be an aggressor in order for the opinion to stand. Otherwise, it gets squashed with the momentum of everything else. And then you also end up destroying the concept of free thinkers along with it. And even going into this broader term that we are almost talking about in the beginning about this like whole like united government concept, it's like once you unite the government and you have this united globalist concept of just the entire everything all just being under one political system, then it's like you get into the aspect of, again, who watches the Watchmen? Whenever there's like that person that's inevitably in charge of that, or the group that's inevitably in charge, who is the ones who are going to facilitate and actually watch that group? And on top of that, if you don't agree with their philosophy, their ideas, like where else are you going to go once they're the controlling factor for any opinion? And if you have any varying opinion from the rest of the quote world in this melting pot type concept, then you're going to instantly flag the enemy and have nowhere to go.
Right.
On top of the fact of instantly destroying your identity, because once everything gets to be completely blended, you fall into this melting pot concept and everybody essentially loses their identity, which is part of the whole chaos theory of it. Is once nobody feels like they belong to part of any specific group, then they're more than happy to be part of the big group as a whole.
Right. That was sort of the end game, wasn't it? Just sort of erase all identity, all nationality until we're all global citizens.
Make it so that no matter what way you feel, if you feel like you feel any pride for your culture, like you're instantly the bad guy. That's kind of the way that they're inevitably setting it up now.
That is absolutely a globalist trend. Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess kind of starting to wrap up towards the end, man. I don't know if you had any other direction that you wanted to go with this, but as I always say, man, I am more than happy to always have you back on the show to talk about anything that you want to talk about, because even in the beginning of it, man, we went for like 20 minutes that weirdly enough led into what we ended up talking about today. But
yeah, of course.
Man, it is always a pleasure to have you on. But before I start wrapping up, man, I always like to wrap up the show with some words of wisdom, man. So if there's any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners today, and maybe at some point, once you give up too many words of wisdoms, I won't make you do this. But for the time being, I'm still going to make you do it. What were the words of wisdom be today, man?
I guess this time I'll do something different. I'll say hunker down, because this is a extremely chaotic time, and I think like everyone's just feeling a squeeze, not just from the most obvious stuff, but just from their friends and neighbors, sort of showing how connected we really are. Like people being squeezed in another country, we're going to feel in this country, that kind of thing. So this is a good time to just double check everything and, make sure you're safe and you got good plans and that kind of stuff, because we got some really chaotic stuff coming. Pot could be banned just as easily as it could be decriminalized fully. Everything's on the edge of a knife right now.
I mean, honestly, everybody, I'm in a legal state, and it's like one of those points where everybody's like, oh, yeah, it's legal, it's cool. But it's like I always have to constantly remind people, like, dude, it's not federally legal. That's why our company has to put, a different name, or it doesn't have cannabis or whatever in the name, because it will literally not be denied or will be approved by the banks, because that's a national thing. Like, everybody thinks that all of these progressive ideas are already fully set in stone. But realistically, all these, quote, progressive ideas are really just like they could be taken away tomorrow just as easy as they were given.
Yep. That's absolutely true.
And the inevitable messed up part about it is, depending on which side you want to sit on this, again, who's the ones to dictate like what you should be able to do with your own life, as long as you're not harming or hurting other people. And again, we can get into the whole moral debate of this thing, but like cannabis being one of them. Like, who are you hurting with this stuff, by example? Like, the only person that's being hurt is the federal government not being able to regulate a profit off this shit.
Oh, I think there's something in it that they're afraid of. They just don't want to admit it.
Hey, man, but even in Brave New World, man, they have to have a soma. So, I mean, inevitably, I feel like that might be the possibility of cannabis, because working on the inside of cannabis, I've already seen that there's this, it's already happened with tobacco, and you can see this plain as day, that there was this spiritual, whatever you want to call it, element to this plant as it was. And they've pulled it away so far from that natural derivative of what it was that it isn't even the same plant anymore. Like tobacco. Totally different thing than what the tobacco is that we're smoking now. And if you go and smoke some all-natural tobacco, you'll see what I'm talking about. But cannabis is getting to that same spot that just in the time that I've been working in it professionally, like, in like a big facility, I've seen the plants go down, and there have already been pushing continuously for, other means of being able to get stoned off of, extracting this, extracting that. So it's this continuous idea of almost like taking whatever you want to call it, the spirituality of the plant away, separating it and making it so that it's mainly just this high feeling that people are getting from it. And once you've separated it and make it just this high feeling, you're losing that natural connection, and essentially it could just become this new soma of the brave new world, that people think that they're experiencing this religious experience, but it's strictly a synthetic religious experience.
Right. It's probably why the government got into cannabis and LSD research so early there.
And I mean, even more weirder into it too, man. They slowly are starting to decriminalize mushrooms, and in the process of that, they're already looking for new ways to be able to extract psilocybin synthetic type ingredients without actually using mushrooms themselves. So there's already another, quote, spiritual plant, whatever you want to take that for, and they're already starting to separate it where people are getting the high without that natural connection, whatever you want to call that. Again, this is like, it can be viewed scientific, or it can be viewed, you know, a little bit more like woo-woo, or it can be viewed fully occult, but there's clearly something here, and there's a reason and a push that they're all constantly doing this with these plants, with these different things that they clearly see could be almost like a philosophical enemy if people have too much of it, because people will start thinking way too differently than they want them to think. So they have to control the means before it becomes a problem.
I totally agree with that.
I mean, even increasing the potency of some of this stuff, man. Like cannabis 10 years ago versus now, it's like 10 years ago you got productive and wanted to do shit. Now you sit on your ass and want to fall asleep. And that also sounds like it could be part of the drive and intention, is they're also taking away this like creative muse or also element that you get from this stuff by essentially making it so it becomes a sedative rather than this creative tool.
Oh, I know. And it used to be a medicine to start with, so they're hardly even looking at it as medicinal right now. Just trying to look at it as a product. Just the next beer, essentially.
Yep. And that's exactly how they're starting to do it in Michigan too. So I mean, like, I was calling these trends 7 years before they started happening, man. So at a certain point, man, people just got to start believing us, quote, conspiracy theorists, and realize that we've been ahead of this shit forever. And as time goes on, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're right more than we're wrong.
Right. I think the problem is leadership. I don't know if the conspiracy community ever really had any direction to go with all their claims. It's like, listen to me, and that's all I got right now.
Hey, the CIA knows a lot of us are too busy infighting that they don't really see us as that much of a problem. And if you are too much of a problem, then, you know, you get those random videos where it's like, oh, I'm not suicidal. And the next thing you know, that person jumps off a bridge, you know.
Right. Too many times.
Yep. And before, of course, you know, something bizarre happens, because you're always talking out about a lot of this weird stuff, man. If anybody wanted to keep track of your website before the big brother or the powers that be possibly try to take this thing down, where can people go and find Paradigm Thread, and where can they find all of your now daily articles, man?
Excellent. Just go to paradigmthreat.net. That's the main website. And there's a Substack link on the top, or you can just go to paradigmthreat.substack.com. And that'll be the place I'm posting all the articles.
Well, man, as I usually say, it is always a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm really, really looking forward to next time. And again, thank you for doing all of your research. Thank you for doing as extensive as you do, and always laying out not just your ideas and your theories, but also all of the groundwork that led you to those theories, so that people can follow the pace and realize that a lot of this stuff that may sound like it's out there and crazy really isn't nearly as crazy as they think it is.
Right. Yep. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll keep it up.
Perfect, man.